everybody. Looking very much forward to discuss about circularity in automotive. First of all, I want to hand over to Benjamin Kühl, who is going to present us with a few impulses on how we think about circularity in automotive. He is a project lead in our Frankfurt office and is part of the European aftermarket team. Benjamin, over to you.
Thank you very much, and welcome to all of you to joining us into this keynote and small panel discussion around the circular automotive industry. We will present to you a concise perspective on the circular automotive industry, how we see the market moving ahead, and what industry leaders should consider throughout the next years. I would like to start with presenting our perspective on the automotive value chain and where circularity is relevant. We see circularity from the start, from designing vehicle, considering materials and design of the vehicle to make it repairable, recyclable throughout the use cycle of a vehicle, where it gets repaired, shared as a used vehicle, or even in a car sharing program, the use cycles for people without an owned vehicle increase. And then towards the end of the life cycle of a vehicle, we see that an end-of-life vehicle can enable further reuse cycles, gifting used or remanufactured parts to repair cycles, or allow a recycling of materials that allows to lift some of the virgin material burdens of the production of new vehicles. So it's really an end-to-end playing field of the value chain where circularity can act, and we see with different maturity business models across the value chain already today. There are drivers that will lead to a growth in circularity in the automotive industry, driven by, let's say, regulation and let's say public interest in sustainability, but there are also clear economics. Yeah? There are used vehicles, used parts, a repaired vehicle has a clear business case for the owner, and consumers are accepting circular business models. However, we see that key players in the industry, suppliers and OEMs alike, are facing a tough environment at the moment, where the question arises, is circularity in the automotive industry just an environmentally friendly business model, or is it in the end a business opportunity that has a necessity and a place? We see certain countries like Sweden, Netherlands, France, really driving into a regulatory angle, but we will also see countries who will either wait for an EU regulation to take place or will let the industry decide for themselves. We believe that a closer look to what the customers currently adopt, what players already do in the market, and in the end, how the value pools are shifting might inform what the industry will have ahead in the next years. Question one. Customers are accepting circular business models. Well, the reality today is that circular business models typically come at a price advantage for the customer. Used parts vehicles are typically cheaper offered to the customer versus the new part. We see that customers, we survey 30,000 car buyers every year, are giving a higher willingness to pay to circular business models and really having a positive attitude towards circular business models. Second, we see that OEMs and automakers are already active along the value chain. With different maturity, as mentioned, while the design for let's say, recycling is already far advanced, a fully, let's say, circular automotive design is still in a concept phase. During the use cycles, we see very mature business models of reusing, car sharing, of repairing vehicles, and towards the end of life of vehicles, there are structured pathways for dealing with end-of-life vehicles, but this is a developing area where we will see, depending on the EU regulation, probably also, especially in the European market, strong shifts and, let's say, reconsidered business models where today it's a very fragmented industry of very local dismantlers. However, there are two perspectives that we would like to offer to share the importance of this element of the automotive industry. One is the value pools and their shift and what the business is doing in, let's say, economically in size. And then there are three particular shifts that we would like to highlight as an impulse for the discussion. First, In 2030, the automotive industry will be comprised of roughly 1.4 trillion euro. Yeah, this is a European view. And you see highlighted in the red circles the 30% of this value chain that will be comprised in circular business models. This represents 18 billion more than today. Yeah? So we see an 18 billion growth in circular business models from now until 2030, while overall the value chain is moving downstream. The three changes that we selected here to deep dive on is we see an electrification in the car park, which will change repair patterns and, let's say, part structures in the industry, and also a different attitude of car buyers towards used cars and selling used cars in the market. We see reuse cycles changing and a growth in used and remanufactured parts. And there is a huge focus on recycling of materials, and certain parts or certain materials still have a recycling share that offers headroom to increase recycling shares. So overall, there's growth in the market, but it's also a shifting one, which will open opportunities for players who will adopt and change with it. And the change will happen quite fast. Within 5 years, these shifts will open opportunities for those who adopt earlier. So, looking towards the panel and the discussion today, I would like to leave you with three key takeaways that for us summarize the questions ahead. 30% of the automotive industry is in circular business models. You can ask yourself whether this reflects also the share of management attention that you have in your organizations, or whether you see an additional opportunity to have these conversations within your organization. In the end, there are 12 billion euros of the 18 billion in aftermarket revenues that are to be captured, the remainder in recycling. This is a sizable opportunity and a real one. And we believe that this change within 5 years is a fast one, so we believe that bold moves are required, especially for smaller players such as dismantlers or the recycling industry who are stepping into this, but also for incumbents who might want to adopt this and work together. Across all, this will not be a development that will be easy for one player or one part of the industry. This will be, let's say, accompanied by a question of collaboration ecosystems and who would like to be in the future the driving force behind circularity. We hope to see the discussion in the panel or also the discussion with you today and hear your perspective on how we can make the circularity a core part of the automotive industry in the next coming years. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the panel.
So looking forward now to the panel, and very happy to have the following guests with me, starting with Sebastian. Sebastian, you're the CMO of Solved, and you're responsible for the commercial strategy of the end-to-end claims and repair management platform. And you have years of experience in the automotive industry, deep expertise in market development and customer requirements in the aftermarket sector. And you've been exploring over the past years how the ecosystem will evolve under the influence of the circular economy. Looking forward to having you here.
Thanks.
Then we have Christoph, who leads the innovation activities at LKQ Europe, and you're driving the development and implementation of business models for the refurbishment and recycling of vehicle parts across Europe. With your expertise in M&A and the development of services for high-voltage batteries, you're actively shaping the future of the circular economy in the automotive industry. We're looking forward to having you in the panel. And then we have Daniel, who is responsible for networks and requirements for the circular economy at BMW. And your responsibilities include, on the one hand, in-house recycling and dismantling for prototype vehicles, where you're looking at how recycling approaches can be developed very early on, already in the early development of new vehicles, and also outside. You're bringing diverse experience both from within and outside the BMW group. Happy to have you here. Perfect. So let me start with the first question, and maybe starting with you. If we look at the current status and the challenges that we see in the circular economy for automotive, what are the biggest challenges maybe that you see? And what would you say?
What we are doing, we are serving mainly insurance company and leasing company in the case of repairs required. So we are providing them access to body shops across Europe. And for us, what we see is there's a huge demand of having green parts available. So there's a huge demand not only from a regular perspective, but also from a consumer perspective to provide used car, and not used cars, reused or refurbished parts in order to repair vehicles. And this demand is increasing, and this is a challenge we need to attract because at the moment, the availability of green parts is relatively limited, and there are a lot of regulations and things which need to be answered in the next couple of years.
I think with parts, it's a good segue to you, Christoph. Maybe you can also tell us your perspective.
Happy to give a brief statement on that. So as LKQ, we serve more than 100,000 workshops every day with mainly new parts, but those are used to repair. So on the previous slide, we were in that big aftermarket section in the middle. And we're increasingly trying to get used parts into that chain, which in North America is already a quite mature business for us. And I think the biggest challenge is the scale up of demand and supply at the same time, because the supply is very specific. If you have a front right door that only fits to certain models and certain model years, how can you build a good stock of that can be then sold to a big pool of customers? That's not possible. So you need to have a pretty good stock already before people actually buy from you. And having this balance going up is the challenging part currently.
And maybe we also hear the OEM perspective on the parts and circularity of the entire car.
I was about to say, for us as an OEM, it's clearly not only a parts perspective, but also a material perspective. So we believe that you have to look holistically at the complete life cycle that we saw before. And for us, looking at materials and availability materials and access to materials is, besides the parts question, also a very important one. And I guess challenges today in this question is not only the availability. We talked about electrification, that electric drivetrains are becoming more and more important, and therefore we are looking also into opportunities to enhance the availability and also recyclability of those materials for electric drivetrains, clearly talking about battery materials besides the parts topic.
So you're basically taking the availability and the choice of material from the beginning when you're thinking about a new car, basically, into...
Exactly. Yeah. That's also what we call design for circularity, because we believe that we would have to, or would like to, and it makes absolutely sense to design our vehicles right from the beginning in a circular way, and this is increasingly becoming more and more important, not only from a sustainability perspective, talking about carbon footprint, but also at the end of the life cycle, we're talking about dismantling of cars. And if you use more and more the right materials, dismantling becomes more and more efficient. And this is talking also to a regulatory perspective that we also briefly touched before in the keynote.
So when you talk about the life cycle of the car, what are the opportunities that you see, and maybe starting with you again?
Yeah, again, I mean, as I said, if you think about, if you look at our customers in the past, it was always replace versus repair. And we are now pushing a lot on repair. And this is also then a question to the OEMs, that they design their vehicles in the way that we can repair them more easily. And I have to say that the, let's say, European OEMs are quite advanced in this. We do see other OEMs which have, let's say, a different attitude, call it this way. And then obviously we're trying to reuse a lot of parts, because there is a possibility to dismantle a vehicle and then reuse it. However, it's extremely, as Christoph said, it's extremely difficult to manage this, to bring this in line. And this is something we have to look after, to how can we manage this further, and what does it really mean? You know, what are the complexities attached to this?
Yeah, a very good point, and I'm really excited about also the topics you mentioned about making the car from the beginning more repairable. I think also that's our mission generally. It's to keep the vehicle in the life cycle as long as possible, and extend the life cycle. And I think another important aspect, we talked about the economical and the ecological aspect this morning. And there's a related one, but that maybe reflects more the society one, and that is making it affordable for the people who drive, and also having this solution that brings mobility to more people. And we all know inflation has been high in the previous years, a rising cost of living. So for consumers, it's in the end important that there is a choice that is according to the value of the car they're driving, and that we can extend this cycle as long as possible, because then in the end, that's also the most sustainable one.
I guess as looking from an OEM perspective, again, complete value chain, I guess especially since the cars are getting older and older, the parts topic is important. But what we believe is, again, material, and also talking about price points and what kind of options are there for the customers. If we use more and more recycled materials, we believe it's not only due to making sense from a sustainable point of view, due to regulation, there's also business models and business cases behind it. And we believe that technologies, accessibility to technologies, but also accessibilities to cars and parts ultimately lead to improvement along the complete value chain, because as I said before, as long as we make sure that we design the car in a fashion that is recyclable, not only the car itself, also the high voltage drivetrain, the powertrain, the battery, etc., then we believe there are a lot of opportunities, and we essentially just started to tap into these different areas. And I guess, again, what we saw at the keynote is during the next 5 to 6, 7 years, this will become more and more important.
As we see this value pool growing and the opportunity, I think one of the questions that is also always discussed is how is the ecosystem developing, and what is the potential for cooperations basically within within the industry and across the different subsectors. What would you say?
I think it's absolutely necessary. I mean, we briefly discussed it, but I mean, give you a very concrete example. If you would like to take a refurbished, let's say, door, and you have a vehicle which is 10 years old and has a BMW and is in blue, and now you have to make sure that it really fits even from a color point of view. In the past, it was simply not possible, but now we see that paint manufacturers have the ability to precise clearly the color of the vehicle, pre-paint the door in the way that it can be assembled when it's been delivered to the body shop. And in order to do so, we have to have totally different discussions then, because it means like, how do we provide the data? How can they make sure that the parts are available, like you said? You know, what is required in order to do so? What is it in terms of warranties attached to this? Who's responsible for certain things? So all these kind of things were easy if you only use, let's say, brand new parts, but in this new area, these kind of things needs to be answered, and it makes totally sense that we discuss it, because economically it makes sense. We have to make sure that we reuse all the stuff that is available, and this is only possible if we do this in partnerships. Otherwise, everybody will fail.
Yeah, I fully agree with all you said. We didn't want to fight, but now we're maybe too close. No, but generally, I think it's very important to have this ecosystem, because basically collision parts, if you talk about used, only works in this partnership with insurance, with different actors in fleet companies, leasing companies, that really can steer where the business is going and how we, on a bigger scale, implement these types of solutions. But I think also, we have discussed it just before this session. I think also between the more independent aftermarket that we serve and the OE aftermarket, there are more and more links that we need to think about. An old car, yes, there are ways why an old car might still come into a BMW network, but it will probably never stay there for the whole life. That's just too spread out. The whole let's say use phase of the car is with everyone in this room, everyone on the streets, right? So you always have different ways where cars end up. And there are big areas where we can collaborate, in my view, that in the end benefit everyone. So the ecosystem aspect there again.
Yeah, I fully agree. I guess it's really about the complete life cycle of a car. And different actors in the market tap into different pockets along the life cycle. And I guess it's important that any corporation, any ecosystem is looking more or less holistically. You don't have to have one ecosystem doing everything. I guess that's also not sensible. But you have to connect the dots. And just from our perspective, maybe access is a crucial one. Maybe at the end of life, but also in the phase before that. So, for example, a new car coming into OEM workshops, that's typically for a couple of years, and then it's going into the independent aftermarket. And along this life cycle, there are different possibilities to access those materials. It might be from an insurance perspective, that is accident cars or vehicles that can be accessed, and up to the end of the complete life cycle, we are talking about dismantling. And in these areas, I guess cooperation is crucial because no one has a complete solution for everything. You're talking about data, you talk about availability of data. We are thinking about like even physical access because the cars typically do not come to OEM workshops anymore. That's why, for example, the BMW has an extensive network and partnerships with recyclers, where we have opportunities to tap into these availability or to talk about availability of those cars. And I guess, again, we have to look holistically at the complete life cycle.
And if we think about especially the dismantling and recycling aspect, which I think is a very crucial one, do you see regional differences? For example, in Europe with the end-of-life directive, we of course have a bit more of a regulatory push to work on it. How does that maybe differ between the geographies?
Quite significant. I mean, if we look at, we are serving customers in 45 markets. And if you look at the markets, you have mature markets like Europe, where everything is quite regulated, quite structured, and so on. But then you go to a body shop in Latam. I just don't name a country. But I mean, it's a totally different one. It's a totally different network, a totally different way of doing business. And we have to accept that these markets are maybe not so mature in this kinds of regards. So we have to understand what is possible in which region, whom can we collaborate in which region, what are the specifics we need to address, and what is also from a customer point of view, what they are willing and what they are able to pay. Because while we are saying this, I mean, there was this statement that customers are willing to pay a little bit more. I'm not so sure if this is also applicable for countries or regions like LATAM or Africa or something else. So I think this is something where we have to be clear to say, where are we in the stage? Where are other countries? What is really possible, and don't be so naive to say everything what we do in Europe is also automatically applicable to other regions. I think this is something we have to keep in balance.
I think the differences are big. For example, for us in North America, as I said, the kind of circular model in having the used parts back into the car is much more mature. We talk about, I have some numbers in my mind, 17 to 20% of repair claims get repaired with a used part. In Europe, that's below 1%. But if we then look within Europe, we have a model in Sweden that works quite well because it's a more closed systems. I think we had mentioned that before. And we have tried to make a business case with a similar model in a different country in Europe. And we got stuck at some point because there are certain assumptions you need to make, but they are not there yet. So, for example, in Sweden, you cannot really export a car that is supposed to be dismantled. In other countries you can, and there's a big gray market. If you look at some statistics, normally, German government and European government statistics are quite precise. But if you look at the statistics around where do old cars go, there's a big gap where it just says we don't know. It's going somewhere, and this gap makes it very hard to have a real business case behind it because there might be short-term losses that no one wants to take for the long-term benefit. And so I think that's why even within Europe we have still a bit of differences. If we can come to one solution that kind of stays within the European borders, that's probably also a plus. But currently the differences are still quite big. Yeah.
Yeah, fully agree. I mean, we're talking about collaboration approaches, and are they holistically over the world? From our point of view, from my point of view, clearly no. And this is not only due to regulation. I mean, regulation is driving things, but is clearly not the only driver or main driver. You have to understand the differences in the markets, and there are differences clearly also in the European Union. Sweden is different to Italy, to France, to Germany, but I guess we are also looking at it from a global perspective, and the markets, at least from our perspective, main markets, European Union, China, Asian markets, and then the American markets, they are completely different in terms of somewhat customer expectations, but also in terms of local players and drivers. So what different players are driving the need, use parts, which players take part in the dismantling value chain. China is completely different. Again, here, a very good example, speed is astonishing in China, where the market is developing in terms of recyclability, access to raw materials for high voltage batteries, but also in dismantling of vehicles, and there are different players active. A lot of small players, local players in the Chinese market, for example. And again, in Europe, this is completely different. So short answer, there won't be a one-size-fits-all solution. You have to think about local adaptations to, I guess, a general understanding and a general approach.
I think in automotive, it's always a big discussion about China and how the market is developing, also given the speed. Is there something where you would say that we can learn from China and the Chinese players? Or is Europe as a market too specific?
I guess one thing that China does specifically good is setting and giving clear guidance. I guess we talked about regulation like briefly, and I guess the European Union might be an example where we could improve in terms of, say, regulations. I guess we welcome regulation because it helps to set standards, to set guidelines, how the industry is developing, but I guess it's important to look at regulation from a holistic point of view. So what does regulation foster, not only in terms of, I mean, we're talking about sustainability, circular economy today. Clearly, there's also a business side and availability, a market side to that. So how does regulation help that? And I guess that is something that the Chinese government is doing in a very fast fashion, and also in a very focused fashion. So they're not clearly, they're talking about how they can make sure that raw materials stay in the market and these kind of things, yes, but they're giving clear guidelines. And I guess what's most important about regulation is that you have clear guidelines that you can follow, because then you can focus and then you can work on them.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I mean, I cannot speak for China, but I can speak for France. In France, there's a clear rule, which means you always have to provide, in a case of a repair, a green part. So that is forcing now the industry to look into this. I mean, nobody was advocating for this, say, let's do this. But now, since the rules are clear, now we all have to move. So we all have to decide, what does it really mean for us? You know, how do we organize ourselves? What does it mean in terms of margins, players, and so on? So we are really forced to do so. And I think sometimes this is required in order to give the push into the right direction. Not always saying that it's good to have regulation, don't get me wrong, but in this specific case, sometimes I think you have to have someone who's pushing you into the right direction in order then to move in the entire industry, because we're doing our business since a couple of decades, and quite successfully, and now we have to review this and to say, okay, what is the next thing? And I think giving, circular economies, looking into this, how we can optimize this, needs to be a little bit pushed also from the governmental perspective with clear guidelines, as you said.
I can also not speak too much about China. I think there is a big fragmentation, for sure, that we see everywhere in the aftermarket. In China, even more still today than probably in Europe. So that's a bigger difference when we see the newer cars coming in. They are, as I said, they're quite new, so we don't have a big touch point yet, but we see that there will be more knowledge required for us. So while the cars are more digital, more open in theory, for Europeans, it's sometimes harder to to assess, to find out, okay, what could I do with them, what could I fit, what could I repair, because then the parts and the information is not yet there. So there's a gap that we still need to overcome, but I don't see it, in our aftermarket side, I don't see it as a big risk currently yet. The solutions will come with the time. That's normally the advantage, because you have some years to adapt before it's hitting us.
Perfect. We would also like to use the opportunity to answer 1 or 2 questions from the audience, if there are any.
Thank you for the opportunity. One question maybe firstly goes to the OEM. If you say it's hard to get your hands back on your own material, like your own cars, because you don't get them back to your OEM workshops so often, isn't that actually the tipping point for just dropping the old sell a linear car model to being the owner and just making a business model out of the use of the car for yourself, so you stay the owner of your own material forever?
So you mean the OEM owns the car and is just leasing and renting it? Clearly opportunity. I guess you have to look at it holistically, because we talked about that before, in different markets there are different players active, and there are also different customer needs. There are still a lot of customers, talking about from a global perspective, that would like to buy and own a car. So I guess there's, again, not one size fits all solution to it. And what BMW is looking into, I mean, for example, data, we briefly talked about that, data availability also from the cars is becoming more and more important, and we believe out of that data and connectivity of the cars, there are possibilities to optimize access to vehicles, direct interaction with customers, besides that we have to own the car as an OEM.
I think there's one more question.
Thank you. Hi, Joss from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. I may have a bit of a geeky question, but it's intriguing me. As you increase the durability and the length of service of different parts or products, how does that impact your ability to report on climate emissions in the long run? And is it somewhat detrimental, actually, given the current practices on reporting emissions through the life cycle of a product, to increase that durability from that perspective?
Can you answer, or like for your part, or should I?
Maybe you want to start.
Well, from our perspective, we have definitely. I'm not sure if I get the question fully correct, but if you ask us about how do we report emissions, we are working with all of our suppliers to get the reporting in line about the supply chain. So I'm not deeply involved there, but that's happening. So to see, okay, upstream, what do we buy and what is the associated emissions? And for the used parts, we actually have started calculations together with research institutions to see, okay, now if you buy a used part, what would that mean in terms of the emissions? So we have the first, let's say, data in place to give our customers with, for example, in Sweden, in the end, our insurances, to say, you bought from us this year so many doors, say in the example, and so many engines and so many, calipers, that you saved X emissions. So we have the first options there in place, but of course it's not mature enough yet, as we need to be in some years.
Maybe I misunderstood the question, but I guess this is fully agree, and this is also for the material side. This is the part side that you talked about, but also from the material side. So I guess you have transparency along the complete supply chain. That's something that we are actively working on, material accounting, so to say, so that we, for example, take back batteries, recycle them. We have to track and make transparent the different process steps, transport emissions from the material recycle activities, etc., and that has to be made transparent, and then I guess we can give an answer on that. So part side, yes, same story to some extent, but also for the material side.
And same applies for insurer. We provide calculation system, estimation systems, and they are forcing, let's say, their partners in order to reduce CO2 emissions. So we have a catalog where they can see, okay, if they do a repair, what does it mean, what in terms of CO2 emission, what could be an alternative part in order to reduce it. So there's I think across the entire industry, there's a huge push in order to do, let's say, first get the visibility, what's going on, and then step by step to address certain things and how you can tackle them.
And I think that's also something that we see basically overarching across the industry and across the players, right? That everybody's already working on creating the transparency on their CO2 footprint and really working on dual mission strategies. How can I reduce my carbon while also saving costs, for example, then thinking about how to reduce the overall footprint there. And basically, yeah, having a longer durability, but also the transparency will then also help to foster that, that development. Is there any additional question? We would have time for one last.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe a bit of an uncomfortable question, but a few weeks ago, the European Commission uncovered a cartel of European OEMs not disclosing which parts of the vehicle are properly recyclable. And I can't help but wonder what impact does this have in the last few years on the industry, and how does the industry move on from this?
I guess from our perspective, we can say that we have a clear guideline how we work on that, and this activities, from my understanding and my memory, are long ago, like back in the past. And today, what we are doing is, for example, especially talking about dismantling, we have a system in place where we publish completely free of charge globally to all participant or participating companies, dismantling companies, any information about the cars, how they are dismantled, what are the different process steps in different languages, etc., etc. So I would argue, from our perspective, this is completely transparent and accessible to any workshop globally who would like to participate and would like to use that information. So I can only talk about BMW, but that's our approach.
I said we'll be providing calculation systems for all major OEMs and manufacturers, and I can only confirm this. So we have access to this kind of data, so that we can provide this to body shops, that they can precisely see what needs to be done in order to dismantle a vehicle or to repair a vehicle, let's put it this way. And regardless if it's a BMW or a Mercedes or Porsche or even a NIO or whatever, so these data are available. Sometimes, let's say, the granularity of the data is different from, let's say, classical OEMs like BMW and newer OEMs, let's call it this way. But these data are available and free of access, at least for us. And yeah, I can only assure this that this is true.
Yeah, I think I saw the news as well. Thought about what does it mean for us. I don't think there was any immediate action. So it's good that it's kind of on the table. It's resolved in a way. And since I think in the countries that this was most affected on, we were not big enough in used parts yet, that the impact was minimal for us. But yeah, generally, of course, it's good that the practice is stopped for sure. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for the questions. And thank you, Daniel, Christoph, and Sebastian, for the very insightful discussion. And I think we all learned quite a lot about circularity in automotive, got some interesting perspectives. Thanks, Benjamin, also for the interesting speech. And yeah, thank you all.
Thanks.